Hello, my name's Graham and I'm a 10 Pound Pom. I'd like to share with you what it was like coming to Australia, why we came to Australia and how I've made a life here. My father was in the Royal Navy and came out to Australia in 1963 and visited Fremantle, and he was shown what a wonderful place Fremantle and Perth were, and thought, gee, this is a nice place. And when he left the Navy, when he returned to the UK, he was looking for somewhere with more opportunity for his family. Where we lived in the UK, there was very little opportunity for kids there to get ahead. There was no university close to us, and most people at school, most of my friends left school, went to work in the dockyards as fitters and turners, or went to work as labourers, and there wasn't much else around. So Mum and Dad decided that they wanted to move to somewhere with more opportunity. They looked at New Zealand, Australia and Canada. They looked at New Zealand, and New Zealand had a policy where they wouldn't have families of more than 4 children, and there were 5 children in our family, so New Zealand wasn't an option for us. The second choice was Australia, because Dad had been here and thought it looked like a good place and there was lots of opportunity. So when my father said to me in late 1969, and I was 15 years old, he said, what do I feel like about going to Australia? Well, ask any 15-year-old boy, what do they feel like going somewhere? It's just an adventure. So you just say yes, and you think, yeah, that sounds good, and off we go. My brothers and sisters were a little bit younger, so it wasn't so much asking them, it was just telling them. Anyway, I was pretty excited to be going to Australia. So we left where we lived in a little place in Cornwall. We had to go up to Southampton, and there was a ship to come to Australia on. The ship looked like a cruise liner, but was in actual fact a converted World War II aircraft carrier. The ship was called the SS Fair Sky. So we boarded at Southampton and waved goodbye from our family, waved goodbye on the docks, and we sailed off. First part of it is across the Bay of Biscay, and it was very, very rough. My father, who'd been in the Navy and never been seasick, was seasick across the Bay of Biscay. They tied ropes along the corridors so we could hold on to the ropes as the ship rolled, so we could get around. Our first port of call was in the Canary Isles off the coast of Africa. So we called in there for one day, and it was nice and sunny, and we left port and set sail towards Cape Town, and the weather got better, and they decided to put some water in the swimming pool. The swimming pool was actually just the entrance to the hold that they actually just boarded off and put water in to make it like a cruise ship swimming pool. It was nice for about 3 or 4 days, but started getting rough again as we got closer to Cape Town. We pulled into Cape Town and had one day in Cape Town. What I can remember about Cape Town was that as we came into port, there were all these African workers standing on the docks, and we threw pennies in the water and they dived off to collect the pennies. When we went ashore in Cape Town, I was very shocked to find the apartheid system there and how there were buses for black people and buses for white people. Anyway, on leaving Cape Town, we then sailed towards Fremantle. But it was very rough, the pool was empty, and again we had many people seasick. As we passed near Christmas Island, we lost one man, went overboard. I believe he'd had too much to drink and fell over at night. Of course, they stopped the ship, turned around, tried to find him, but had no chance at all. And when we got to Fremantle, there was a collection. When we got to Fremantle, his wife and children were flown back to the UK from Perth. Finally arrived in Fremantle after 4 weeks travelling, and it was the Labour Day long weekend. It was the 1st of March 1970. It was a stinking hot weekend. We were processed through the Fremantle passenger terminal, and because we'd come back as a sponsored family, we had somebody meet us and take us to our accommodation, which was 2 flats in South Perth, and they left us there on the Friday and said, it's a long weekend, we'll see you again on Tuesday, and we were left to fend for ourselves. We had very little Australian money, we didn't know where we were, and it was very hot. I remember walking down to the South Perth jetty thinking I'd go for a swim in the river. I looked into the river and there were these great big brown jellyfish floating by. No, not for me. Anyway, to talk a little bit about the sponsored scheme, we were lucky we didn't have to go into a migrant hospital. Because we were sponsored, we went into private accommodation, and the people that sponsored us would actually help us to buy a house and find somewhere to live. So my father had a job before he arrived. He'd lined up a job at the Royal Perth Hospital. So he was working at the Royal Perth Hospital, and landlords, the people that sponsored us, started showing us suburbs and houses in which we could go and live. So eventually we bought a house in a suburb of Perth called Linwood, which was an English suburb, and a lot of the migrants went together and lived in that suburb because landlords sponsored people and they put you in the congregated together. My father didn't find Royal Perth Hospital to his liking, and he got a job as a occupational health nurse on the Kwinana Industrial Strip. We then moved down to Rockingham near the Kwinana Industrial Strip, and I finished my schooling. I finished my year 12 at Kwinana High School. From there I did my leaving and matriculation and went on to a place called the West Australian Institute of Technology, which is now Curtin University, and did applied physics.
What kind of experiences do you remember on your journey over when you were on the boat?
Oh, on the boat coming over, yes. It's funny, on the boat coming over, you have 2 groups of people. There's a group of people that are coming to Australia determined to make a new life and not spend any money, and my parents and family are in that group. And there's another group of people that are coming out on the assisted passage scheme, and they're just coming for 2 years, because the arrangement with the Australian government was that if you came to Australia, you had to stay 2 years. If you went back before that, you had to pay back the government all the money for the assisted passage out, as well as your return airfare. So one group of people on the ship were there just to party and have a good time, and the other group of people were there not to spend any money. On the ship we had schools, so we could go to school every day. There was school for a couple of hours a day, and all the normal entertainment things on ships. We had there was the swimming pool, which wasn't full very often. We played deck quoits and table tennis. Table tennis was a favourite of mine because I got used to how this ship would actually roll. The ship would go from side to side, and I found that I had a knack of timing particularly my forehand shots with the roll, so I could smash it quite hard. I actually got to the final of the table tennis competition until I got beaten.
What about your expectations of Australia? So when you arrived, was it as you expected?
we didn't learn a lot about Australia and England. We learnt about large sheep stations and kangaroos and things like that, but I really wasn't prepared for such a developed city to move into. The city of Perth was actually larger than the city I'd left in England. We lived in the countryside in England near the city of Plymouth, and the city of Perth was bigger than Plymouth, so it was quite daunting to find the city as large as what it is and spread out as what it is. The housing is very different. In Western Australia, in Perth, it was quarter-acre blocks and individual houses. In Plymouth, it's, terraced houses and horrible things. The schools were very different. Took me a while to adjust to schooling. Subjects are taught at different levels, and I found the Australian system much more Americanised than the English system. So there was quite a bit to get. Our textbooks in Australia were American textbooks. There was a lot to get used to. Never got used to the funny shaped ball. When I was forced to play Australian rules, I just dropped the ball at my feet and I kicked it along the ground exactly as I did in soccer. So I was never very popular for doing that, but I was quite good at other sports. So I was good at athletics and things like that. But Australian rules didn't do anything for me, I'm afraid.
And what about once you stayed in Australia, how long after you arrived did you apply for citizenship?
Okay, so after finishing at the university, I got a job and I got married and I had Australian children. I didn't apply for citizenship until almost 30 years later. And the reason for that was after you'd been in Australia more than 2 years and you were granted residency status, which we had full rights as an Australian. We could vote and everything else, and I felt I didn't need that certificate. Didn't travel overseas, so I didn't need to get an Australian passport. So I would have been able to get one anyway based on my residency status. Eventually I decided that I needed to get the Australian citizenship, and I took the ceremony in Launceston, and I can remember there's a photograph on the front page of the Examiner when we all got awarded our citizenship.
Do you find that the term 10 Pound Pom is quite disrespectful? Or
No, you don't. I don't find it disrespectful at all. It's mostly said tongue in cheek. Yes. And it's most of a jibe, and I think it's you jibe at people in that sort of way deliberately to see what sort of reaction you get. And if you get a laugh it off reaction and join in, everything's good. If you get the negative reaction, they're not the sort of people that you really want in your country anyway.
Okay. Is there anything else that you want to add? I think that's all the questions. I think we've covered it.
Covered everything, or?
I think so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.